What if I told you that in 1889, an entire American city disappeared overnight, and the people who lived there woke up to find themselves citizens of a completely different state? This isn't science fiction. This is the incredible true story of how a secret society literally stole Bristol, Tennessee, and turned it into Bristol, Virginia, in one of the most audacious land grabs in American history. Picture this. You go to bed in Tennessee, you wake up in Virginia. Your house didn't move. The streets didn't change. But somehow, everything around you belongs to a different state entirely. The people responsible? A shadowy group of businessmen who orchestrated one of the most brilliant and devious schemes ever pulled off on American soil. Today, we're diving deep into this forgotten chapter of history that will make you question everything you think you know about how cities are born, how states are formed, and just how far powerful people will go to get what they want. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this story has been deliberately buried for over a century and why it reveals uncomfortable truths about American politics that still echo today. But first, let me paint you a picture of Bristol in the 1880s. This wasn't just any small town. Bristol sat right on the border between Tennessee and Virginia, literally straddling the state line down the middle of what's now called State Street. Half the town was in Tennessee, half was in Virginia. People lived on one side, worked on the other, and nobody really cared which state they were technically in. The town was booming. Coal mines dotted the surrounding mountains. The railroad had arrived, bringing commerce and opportunity. Bristol was becoming a regional powerhouse, and everyone wanted a piece of the action. But here's where things get interesting. The Tennessee side of Bristol was growing faster, getting richer and attracting more businesses. The Virginia side? Not so much. This imbalance didn't sit well with certain influential people on the Virginia side of town. These weren't just ordinary citizens complaining about their neighbor's success. We're talking about a carefully selected group of the most powerful men in the region: bankers, railroad executives, mining company owners, and politicians. Men who were used to getting their way, and who saw the prosperity of Tennessee Bristol as a personal affront to their authority. They called themselves the Bristol Development Corporation, but that was just a front. Behind closed doors, they were something else entirely. A secret society bound by oath, operating in the shadows, with connections reaching all the way to the governor's mansion in Richmond and the halls of Congress in Washington. Their goal wasn't just to compete with Tennessee Bristol. It was to eliminate it entirely. The plan they hatched was so audacious, so complex, and so legally questionable that it took them 3 years of secret meetings to work out all the details. They would quite literally move the state line, not by a few feet or yards, but by miles. They would redraw the map so that all of Bristol, both sides, would belong to Virginia, and they would do it in a way that appeared completely legal and legitimate. Here's how they pulled it off, and trust me, this gets wild. First, they needed to create a legal justification for moving the state line, so they commissioned what they called a historical survey of the Tennessee-Virginia border. They hired surveyors, but not just any surveyors. These were men on their payroll, men who would find exactly what the society wanted them to find. The surveyors produced a report claiming that the original border survey from 1749 had been wrong. According to their findings, the real border was actually 3 miles south of where everyone thought it was. This meant that not just Bristol, but several other Tennessee towns and thousands of acres of valuable mining land had been incorrectly assigned to Tennessee for over a century. Now, you might be thinking, how could they possibly get away with claiming that everyone had been wrong about a state border for 140 years? That's where the society's political connections came in. They had allies in the Virginia state government who were more than happy to accept these corrected survey results without asking too many uncomfortable questions. But here's the truly brilliant part of their scheme. They knew that Tennessee would fight this. They knew there would be legal challenges, political battles, maybe even violence. So they planned for all of that. In fact, they counted on it. The chaos and confusion would provide perfect cover for what they really wanted to accomplish. While everyone was distracted by the border dispute, the society moved to phase 2 of their plan. They began systematically buying up all the valuable property in the disputed territory. But they didn't do this openly. Instead, they used a network of shell companies and frontmen to make the purchases. Local farmers and small business owners had no idea they were selling their land to the same group of people who were orchestrating the border change. The purchases were made at well below market value because the sellers were told the land might become worthless once the legal challenges were resolved. Better to sell now and get something, the society's agents would say, than to hold on and risk losing everything if the courts rule against you. Meanwhile, the society was also working the political angle. They had friends in Congress who introduced legislation supporting Virginia's claim to the disputed territory. They had newspaper editors on their payroll who wrote articles about the historical injustice of the incorrect border. They even had judges who were ready to rule in their favor when the inevitable legal challenges reached the courts. But the most audacious part of their plan was still to come. In early 1889, while the border dispute was still working its way through the courts, the society did something unprecedented. They declared that since the matter was in legal limbo, they would establish their own temporary government for the disputed territory. They called it the Bristol Provisional Authority, and they claimed the right to collect taxes, enforce laws, and make binding decisions about land use and development. This was essentially a shadow government, operating in direct defiance of both Tennessee and Virginia state law. But because the legal status of the territory was unclear, neither state could definitively say the Provisional Authority was illegitimate. It was a masterful exploitation of bureaucratic confusion. The Provisional Authority immediately began issuing new deeds and titles for all the property the society had been quietly purchasing. They retroactively legitimized their shell company purchases by declaring them valid under their new governmental framework. In essence, they were laundering their land grab through their own fake government. By the summer of 1889, the society controlled virtually every valuable piece of property in what had been Tennessee Bristol. The coal mines, the railroad depot, the main commercial district, even the courthouse. They had effectively bought a city using insider knowledge and political manipulation to acquire it at a fraction of its true value. But they still needed to make their conquest official. That's where the final phase of their plan came in. And this is where things get really dark. On September 15, 1889, the Provisional Authority announced that they were dissolving themselves and transferring all their powers and property rights to the Commonwealth of Virginia. They claimed this was necessary because their historical research had definitively proved that the territory had always rightfully belonged to Virginia. The ceremony was held at midnight, in secret, with only society members present. No Tennessee officials were notified. No residents of the affected area were consulted. It was a done deal, presented to the world the next morning as a fait accompli. When the people of Bristol woke up on September 16, 1889, they found Virginia state flags flying over their courthouse, Virginia license plates on government vehicles, and Virginia officials collecting taxes. Overnight, they had become Virginians, whether they wanted to be or not. The reaction was explosive. Tennessee Governor Robert Love Taylor immediately declared the transfer illegal and demanded federal intervention. Protests erupted throughout the former Tennessee Bristol. Some residents talked openly about armed resistance. The society had anticipated all of this, and they were ready. They had already arranged for Virginia National Guard units to be stationed in Bristol to maintain order during transition. They had Virginia judges ready to issue injunctions against any attempts to reverse the transfer. Most importantly, they had influential friends in Washington who made sure the federal government would stay out of what they characterized as a minor border adjustment between consenting states. The legal challenges dragged on for months, but the society's preparation paid off. Every court case was heard by judges who had financial or political connections to the Virginia interests. Every appeal was delayed by procedural maneuvers orchestrated by society lawyers. Every attempt at federal intervention was blocked by well-placed congressional allies. By 1890, the transfer was officially recognized by both state governments. Tennessee gave up its claim to Bristol in exchange for some face-saving concessions and a payment that was widely rumored had gone directly into the pockets of corrupt state officials. The people of Bristol had no choice but to accept their new status as Virginia residents. But here's what makes this story even more remarkable. The society didn't just steal a city. They completely transformed it. Within 5 years of the transfer, Bristol, Virginia, had become one of the most prosperous towns in the South. The coal mines expanded dramatically. New railroads were built. Manufacturing plants were established. The population doubled, then tripled. All of this growth was controlled by the society and their allies. They owned the mines, the railroads, the factories, and most of the commercial real estate. They had turned their illegal land grab into a legitimate business empire worth millions of dollars. The theft of Bristol had made them some of the richest men in America. The human cost of the scheme was enormous. Hundreds of families lost their homes when they couldn't afford the new Virginia property taxes. Small businesses that couldn't compete with society-owned enterprises were forced to close. Many of the original Tennessee residents were essentially driven out of their own town. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of this story is how completely it has been erased from history. The society's influence extended far beyond Bristol. They controlled newspapers, funded historians, and influenced textbook publishers. The official story of Bristol's transfer to Virginia makes no mention of the secret society, the provisional government, or the systematic land grab. According to the sanitized version that appears in most history books, it was simply a matter of correcting a historical surveying error. The truth was buried so effectively that even today, most residents of Bristol don't know the real story of how their city came to be. The society's descendants still control much of the wealth and political power in the region, and they have no interest in publicizing their ancestors' crimes. This story reveals something deeply disturbing about American democracy in the late 19th century. It shows how a small group of wealthy, connected individuals could literally steal a city and get away with it. It demonstrates the corruption that was possible when money, politics, and legal manipulation combined forces. And it proves that the official version of history isn't always the true version. But there's a modern relevance to this story that makes it more than just a historical curiosity. The tactics used by the Bristol Secret Society, political manipulation, shell companies, regulatory capture, media control, have become standard operating procedures for powerful interests in contemporary America. The scale might be different, but the fundamental approach remains the same. Understanding how Bristol was stolen helps us recognize similar patterns of corruption and manipulation happening today. It shows us how seemingly legitimate legal and political processes can be weaponized by those with enough money and influence. And it reminds us that the real power in America has always belonged to those who know how to work the system from behind the scenes. The secret society that stole Bristol succeeded because they understood something that most people don't want to admit. In America, if you have enough money, enough political connections, and enough patience, you can literally rewrite reality. You can change laws, alter borders, and transfer ownership of entire cities. You can do it all legally, legitimately, and with the full backing of the government. The theft of Bristol, Tennessee, wasn't just a crime. It was a proof of concept. It demonstrated that in America, everything is for sale, including democracy itself. The society's success inspired similar schemes throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Land grabs, political manipulations, and corporate conspiracies that shaped the development of the American West and South in ways that most people never realized. Today, Bristol, Virginia is a thriving city with a rich history and a bright future, but it's built on a foundation of theft, corruption, and deliberate historical amnesia. The beautiful downtown buildings, the successful businesses, and the prosperous neighborhoods all exist because a secret society decided to steal a city and had the power to make it stick. The descendants of that society are still there, still wealthy, still influential. They've never acknowledged what their ancestors did, never made reparations to the families who were displaced, and never allowed the true story to be officially recognized. The theft continues, in a sense, because the perpetrators were never held accountable and the victims were never compensated. This is the story they don't want you to know. The story of how American cities were really built, how state borders were really drawn, and how democracy really works when enough money and power are involved. It's a story that reveals uncomfortable truths about the gap between American ideals and American reality. The secret society that stole Bristol succeeded because they understood the system better than their victims did. They knew that in America, the law belongs to whoever can afford the best lawyers. They knew that democracy belongs to whoever can buy the most politicians. And they knew that history belongs to whoever controls the narrative. Understanding this story doesn't just teach us about the past. It equips us to recognize and resist similar schemes in the present. Because make no mistake, the theft of Bristol was not a unique historical anomaly. It was a template, a blueprint for how power operates in America. And that blueprint is still being used today.